Welcome back to Smart Scale Sessions. Today I'm joined by Michele Silverman Bedell, owner of Silverson's Realty, a boutique firm based in Scarsdale, Westchester County, New York, just north of New York City. Michelle and her team have built a reputation for personalized, concierge level service across Westchester and Manhattan, representing everyone from first-time buyers to seasoned investors in one of the most competitive real estate markets in the country. Michelle, I'm really glad to have you on. Thanks so much for
Thank,
joining.
thank you for inviting me.
Great, of course. So I just want to dive in a little bit into your background. You've been in the space and represented so many clients over the years. What kind of got you into real estate and getting into the brokerage side?
Okay, so I've been practicing for over 30 years, and I started in the industry coming from a totally different background. I was a school psychologist, and I worked with handicapped children primarily, and some adults. And I really, I think working in psychology, one learns an enormous amount of patience and understanding when you're working with people or when you're working with families who are going through a lot of emotional stress. And I was always interested in business and real estate. And I just decided to get licensed and switch from working as a psychologist after I had my family and my kids. I wanted to kind of get away from working with kids. But it was a very good background because it really taught me how to be very understanding and very supportive and about people who are buying a property because it's your biggest purchase basically. Whether you buy one or many or you're an investor, you're still concerned with your bottom line and you're still concerned with buying a property and the investment. So it takes an enormous, I think, toll. It's a very emotional, even if with investors, even if they're just seeing their rate of return, you still dealing with people and you're still dealing with their emotions, right? I'm not handling their money per se, but I'm handling their investment, whether it be on the buy side or the sell side. So you have to really take that into consideration. And when I first started, I worked with builders and developers. It was my first entree into real estate. So I learned all about new construction and I learned about environmental tests and soil samples and perk tests and what it went into building a house or a subdivision. So it really gave me a great insight into that part of the industry, and which I did for, I think it was about 2 years. And I also got to know in searching for land for them, for the developers, I got to learn about many different communities, which back then it wasn't very common for a realtor to cross territory or go from one territory to another or one location to another.
Mm. That's an incredible background. I mean, I always kind of attribute real estate professionals kind of being generalists, touching so many different areas, but you've literally seen and worked in pretty well all the areas of real estate. I can see why a lot of your clients kind of have a lot of trust in you. And you mentioned, um, it's mostly most people's largest acquisition and purchase in their
Correct.
life. They're coming to you
Right.
for guidance and trust. And like you said, there's a lot of emotional tie to that. Um, I guess early on though, what were some of the lessons that kind of shaped your approach to running a client first brokerage after you have all these experiences?
Well, in terms of clarify, in terms of what exactly are you referring to in terms, clarify your
Well,
question.
yeah, just exactly like what was something in the initially that kind of led you to wanting to get into brokerage and the way that you're running your brokerage today.
Well, well, I think so. My brokerage is a boutique company. We're not one of many, many offices. I have one office and I'm a very hands on kind of person. So it's very important to me. I don't want to say to have control, but to really, since I'm responsible for everyone's licenses in the office, people come to me and I handle. I'm not necessarily involved, but I really oversee many of their transactions. And even the experienced agents will sit down with me and I help them analyze a property, or I help them price out a property, or I'll help with any issues that come up in terms of negotiations um, um, or even just any issues that may arise during the whole buying and selling process. And I'm available if they need me to cover for them, or, in any which way I can. So it's when I work for other companies, it's interesting. Before I started this, and I opened in January of 2005, right? Um, I was always interested in starting my own business, but it was kind of like life's events kind of push you in directions. And
Mhm.
I remember thinking, should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? And I consulted with a former client of mine who was my attorney at the time, and also my father. And I said, should I open my own business? I'm not basically a risk taker by nature. And they said, you have nothing to lose. You'll be fine. And the worst you
Mhm.
could do is lose some money. So I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. And that's kind of what pushed me in that direction. And I think, I love being on my own. So when you work with another company, you have to follow their protocols. If you want to do any advertising that's kind of out of the box, you have to ask permission. You always had to go to somebody. And what I felt, although I had a great broker previously, I always felt, whether it would be for him or anybody else, that I would have to really not ask for permission, but everybody gets used to doing it a certain way. And I guess myself as well. And if I wanted to do something really more creatively or out of the box, it wasn't frowned upon, but they weren't keen on doing it. So being on my own, I really have the opportunity to um, to explore new ways of marketing, to be open to new ideas, to purchase anything that I want to purchase for as a marketing tool, to do any events that I want to do. I just had an end of the summer event in a very nice upscale coffee shop, kind of to wind down the summer. That would have been maybe a little bit tricky if I worked for somebody. So
Right.
anyway, I think I have, at the end of the day, probably a little bit more entrepreneurial,
Yeah.
although spirit in me.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of people we have on the podcast and people that we listen.
Yeah,
The listeners are very entrepreneurial also and obviously want to be. And that's good to hear. I mean, a lot of people generally when they try going out on their own, they have a lot of backlash from their surrounding people in their lives. So to hear the support must have been great for you, confidence booster.
it
And
was
you mentioned obviously you're in a very competitive market,
very
and
competitive.
being able to kind of go out of your comfort zone in whether it's marketing or whatnot. I'm sure you're constantly evolving. What is it like having to be in such a competitive market?
Well, it's interesting. When I first opened, I just you brought up something that reminded me. An agent, one of the agents in my office is located in Scarsdale. I'm in kind of southern Westchester in New York. I don't know if you know the area, but
Mm.
it's a very competitive market. And Westchester in general we're about 30 minutes north of Manhattan, extremely, extremely competitive. And one of the agents said to me, God, Michelle, I really, I give you a lot of credit. I don't know if I would have had the guts to do that. And
Mhm.
you have to be passionate and love what you do. Real estate is not an easy industry, right? By no
Mhm.
means. And one has to really love and be passionate about what one does. And, I enjoy working with people. I enjoy solving problems and thinking creatively on how to work through the issues that arise in a transaction. So
Mhm.
I think, and it's always, even though the process is probably the same, each transaction has a bit of a different tempo and nuance, and you have to kind of understand that. It's a hard thing to teach.
Absolutely. Yeah, every deal definitely has its own kind of soul to it for sure. Even though
Correct.
you start with the hunt and then end with a close, but in the in between, all has its different flavors, and especially when it comes to market certainties and the situation that we've had over the past 5 years, or even um, to see how the markets change since you opened in 2005. Like we're now dealing with New York is classic for having, low inventory. We're now dealing
Low.
with well, we had rising rates the past few years. How do you adjust to kind of the shifting buyer expectations when going through different cycles?
Markets. I think that I have clearly worked in every cycle, right?
Mhm.
When I started, almost every savings and loans, too young to remember, went bankrupt. And,
Yeah.
you could not sell a pencil basically. And I had no experience at the time. So clearly I couldn't sell anything. But
Yeah.
the everything, and I kind of went through almost every cycle. So I've been in the market when it was '05 and '04, '05, when the market was just sky high, and then it
Mhm.
tanked in '08, right?
Yeah.
With the mortgage industry basically changing and the appraisal industry changing, and then your marketing had to shift, right? Because everything was like your best buy, your best value, and then the market started to come back, and then it was doing quite well, and then unfortunately COVID hit, right?
Yeah.
And you had to be really creative because you couldn't show technically
Yeah.
in New York, at least. They had all sorts of rules. You couldn't show property, you couldn't enter a property, you couldn't make an appointment. I mean, it became very difficult. And and then buyers were frantically trying to get out of this Manhattan and out of
Mm-hmm.
the density of the city. So they were renting everything inside, sight unseen.
Hmm.
And so I kind of had a flow with that, which thank God we did a very good um, time during COVID. And then those renters all became sellers or buyers, rather. And so you had to be creative in that because then the inventory was starting to shrink. So you had to
Hmm.
look at things, and even rentals were very tough to find. So you really had to think out of the box and network and really use your creativity and also your relationships with other realtors or agents to really work through transactions because you couldn't get to the building department, you couldn't get information. So
Yeah.
you had to really be more cooperative during those times, is what I found. And then fast forward, the is inventory has been a huge problem, not to
Hmm.
mention the interest rates that started to go up. But in the last few years, it's been a real problem. So it led to huge bidding wars, very high prices. And I am starting to see in some markets a change. I wouldn't say it's a buyer's market yet, but I would say there's a shift towards that, in my opinion, where I'm seeing more homes on the market longer. The days on the market are increasing. I'm
Hmm.
seeing more inventory come on. Um, but I am seeing, I will say, more buyers in the market. I think there was a
Right.
pullback for a while, and now, like at our open houses that we're doing on new listings, there's a flood of buyers. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I
Mm-hmm.
do think that while people are overbidding, it's not with the craziness of the bidding of in 2003 and 2000 and 2023 and 2024.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
am
Cool.
starting to see a slight shift. And people are taking more time in some cases, and they're being more thoughtful in the way they're bidding.
Yeah, COVID was a time that I don't think anybody, no matter the experience level, was prepared for, especially in the real estate market.
Right. Right.
It was an absolute feeding frenzy, I think, across the board. But yeah, I would say the consensus is that there is a shift to buyer's markets. Obviously, there's some that, and depending on where you are, obviously in New York,
Right.
um, you're seeing that it's starting to transition. Some places have already gotten into the buyer's market. Um, would you say that people are kind of holding off due to the expectation that there's going to be more future rate cuts
I
down the line, or?
well, I think that the buyers are starting to come into the market, right? I
Hmm.
think a lot decided to re-rent in the city or wherever they were renting, and I think now that, but I don't know if they're going to hold off. I think it really depends on their life situations, right? If they're renting in Manhattan or wherever, and their rents are very high, and now they're married by now, and they have one child. Now another one is coming soon, or in the processes of being planned. Then
Mm.
you have space. Space is really tight in Manhattan, right? You don't
Yeah.
have a lot of space for all the equipment that comes along with having a family. So
Yeah.
at least not in the New York area, um, unless you have a ton of money. But
Yeah.
most of
That
these
solves a
young
lot of things.
Right, and they're thinking, you know what? I need now a backyard. I have too much equipment. I have to work close to Manhattan because now I can't like live anywhere in this world and commute or be on Zoom all the time. So um, most people now who are thinking of moving out of the city are still thinking I have to be in Manhattan within 40 minutes, let's say. So
Mhm.
there's a big shift to uh, moving out of out of Manhattan, and I think a lot of it has to do with uh, their life events, whether it be a divorce or having kids or getting
Mhm.
married or whatever it is. There's always life events that typically move people around. So
Yeah.
hopefully, I think baby boomers who um, will feel the need to start selling because they don't want to pay the high tax structure, especially
Yeah.
if the kids are no longer in school, right? So it's an interesting. You have to kind of look at the whole picture and
Yeah.
just kind of see it.
Well, it's constantly like an evolving dynamic, of course, and the ecosystem of New York is one of the most complex, I think, markets on in the world, no
Yeah.
doubt. But for somebody like you, I mean, if people are moving out of Manhattan and moving into more of the suburbs, that's got to be, you'd have to be, prepared for that with your team. Um, what would you say is kind of your focus on within your team to be able to prepare for that influx of migrants coming into your area?
Well, I think we're always prepared, so we're always
Mm.
looking for new listings. We take a very I think, we're clearly prepared. I don't think when you're in this industry, as long as I am and most of the agents, even the new ones, you you have to take a very hands-on approach, and you have to be willing and available to your clients. I wouldn't say at a moment's notice, but you really have to be willing and be available to them. We also don't work, you mentioned the word teams. We don't have teams. Everybody works individually, and I cover people as well as I handle my own client base. But
Right.
I assist them when they need to, if they're going on vacations, but we don't work in teams as other companies do.
Right.
There's no hierarchy. Everybody kind of is equal and even,
Mhm.
and whether you're a new agent or not. But I think we clearly can handle an influx of buyers. We did that during COVID, and now we'll handle sellers when they sell. It's not an issue by any
Right.
means. The way we practice or the way I practice and the way I tell everybody in the office to practice, I expect that, is that we are very hands on. We do all our own due diligence short of a title search. I don't know if they have title searches in Canada, but
Mhm.
they probably do. It shows line of ownership as well as any liens or issues. So I check everything out once we get a listing or work with the buyer. We check permits, taxes, surveys, building department cards, improvements to a house, assessor cards. We check every single thing out, and which we
Mhm.
then send to our attorney, whether on the buy side or the sell side. We take a very hands-on approach, and we don't just give the information, but we really explain the information that we're handling on the particular property to the buyer or the seller. And we work through open permits, for instance. Very often, I had a transaction this summer where a buyer was buying a property in New Rochelle, and they found out that there were open permits on the property. I found out. And, which means one has to know what that means. Okay, so we have open permits. Well, those permits have to be closed before you take ownership, right? Or it should be
Mhm.
closed because the buyer should not inherit the problems of the seller. The reason that they were not closed in this case was that probably the sellers did not want to incur an expense or have their taxes increase, right? So until those
Mm.
permits get closed, nobody either knows about it or the assessor doesn't know, and therefore the taxes remain the same. So you have to know the implications of everything you're finding and you're doing, because you have to explain that to the buyer, who now has to wait. The other implication is that deck or whatever wasn't legal or wasn't closed out now has to be finished and finalized, which means it takes time. An architect,
Mm.
contract have to finalize that issue. So these are different things that we do for all our clients, as well as really explain the survey and work through any title issues that arise later on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you just elaborated so well on how complex and drawn out a simple, what
It's
seems like,
not
yeah,
right.
what seems like it should be a simple transaction. I mean, obviously there's some difficulty to it, but that's the reason why you bring brokers on and that you're solving the challenges for, your average buyer. Most of these people are either used to living in Manhattan and they have most of their things taken care of for them and in condos or whatever it may be and have never bought in um, a home before. So coming across these challenges is, I'm sure it saves them a lot of restless nights dealing with you. But I was going
I
to
hope.
say,
I hope.
yeah, exactly. Well, I'm sure it gives them a peace of mind, especially getting it in clear terms and layman terms, I guess, explained to them. But I would say if there's sort of one thing or one major challenge that you're seeing, whether that, within your business today, is there something that's really kind of sticking out for you?
I think, well, the markets, the industry at least has changed tremendously from the time I started, right? When I started, we used books that had all the listings. By the time those books were published, they were stale. It was 2 weeks
Yeah.
old, right? So those listings either were gone or the prices changed or they were in contract. Probably the biggest change was, or one of the biggest changes started probably in the 90s with the online listings, with the multiple listing service, having all the listings online, right? And with the advent of the internet and Google, and really where the public was given access to all the data. I remember when that happened, realtors were afraid they would lose their jobs and you wouldn't have a purpose in life. And what's the purpose if the public can access the data, right? But now that's changed. Obviously, we're still here, but
Yeah.
platforms like Zillow, I don't know if you have something like that in
Yep.
Canada. Okay. Zillow, truly hotpads, realtor.com, any online platform where the information is public now, right? When people can kind of get an estimate or an estimate of property. I
Hmm.
think that's one of the biggest changes in the industry that's happened. I think
Hmm.
the biggest change, and it's something that we probably grapple with all the time, is the importance of social media and digital marketing. And we are always looking for, and thankfully, I have a great admins who are very creative and much more knowledgeable about the social marketing or digital marketing than I am, and can create things that really, help a property sell. But that's the biggest challenge because we're always looking for new and innovative ways to market our properties. And
Right.
now with AI, obviously, that adds another level, another layer to
Hmm.
our business. And you really, I think in this industry, as I said when I first started to speak, you can't kind of get locked into old ways, even though I'm not 35 years old or 40, obviously. You have to really be open to new technology and new creativity and new marketing. and be
Right.
really open to what's around, and really know your competition. And even during COVID, we were always putting out um, pieces on, on Instagram, on Facebook, or whatever it was at the time.
Mhm.
Always, we were doing
Yeah.
every day a different post, and even if it wasn't real estate related, it was had to do with what our clients would like. So we would
Right.
try to connect with them on that level.
Yeah. Well, as the old saying goes, out of sight, out of mind, right? You always want to stay in front of the client's mind, and that's been one of the biggest things. Like, obviously, within brokerage, it's you have to have almost a degree in social media coming out of school nowadays if you want to get into being a broker, because it's just where everybody is,
Right,
and
right. Yeah.
nobody's buying those magazines anymore, and
No,
it's the
no,
way
no.
to have access to where the market's at now.
We also, I mean, in thinking about being creative or trying to do different things online, I started about a year ago an Instagram live post where we do Instagram live. I do it with an attorney and a mortgage broker, banker,
Mhm.
and we do it usually once a week, and we hit
Mhm.
different topics on what we do, so it could be a topic about what's doing with it. We spoke last week about the drop in the rates, and how
Mhm.
does that impact the market? Has it brought many buyers into the market? Does she foresee a further rate drop? So we
Mhm.
speak about all different issues. We'll speak about title issues, appraisal issues, survey issues, whatever it is, or the new laws that have come out of the new the Norris settlement. There was a
Right.
huge lawsuit that's from the National Association of Realtors. We speak about that. I also teach real estate, so I mean we're bringing in different things, and the Instagram Live I think is really a great thing, as well
Mhm.
as I've done. Um, I I worked with somebody who was I was doing professional videos or informative videos that I would post on YouTube. So I'm always looking for different things to do
Mhm.
to
I
market
love it.
myself, market the company.
Definitely an entrepreneur at heart. You've touched
Which
almost every you always seem to touch every sort of aspect of the space. That's amazing. Um, I love that sort of integration with the mortgage broker. They're obviously a key part in the whole transaction process, and they're critical. But I would say we've kind of talked about the past, what the COVID and prior experiences were, where we think the market's at now. Where do you kind of see in the next 3 to 5 years for Silversons? Where do you see yourself in 5 years in terms of, are you going to be expanding? Are you going to be trying to get a bigger presence in some other market? Are you going to try and stay where you are? Or?
well, look, I've thought about expanding into the Connecticut market, and one of my agents has asked me if I would do it. I thought about it. I think that this market is, I know I know the New York market, like I know the Westchester market. We
Mhm.
do sell in Brooklyn and Queens, and I've sold in Manhattan, I've sold on Long Island. I'm comfortable doing that. And I think that when you're representing people at this point, I prefer to stay with what I know. I
Mhm.
think that real estate is a very um, specific and very detailed business. And you have to know where to get information when you need it, right? And you have to know how to solve a problem. And I think at this point, I'd like to just expand my presence in Westchester or within this geographic area. And
Mhm.
there's enough expansion possibilities without going to Connecticut, New Jersey. It's just a different way of doing business.
Right.
And although I think it would be interesting to me. I think I would like to just expand in terms of hiring more agents who are multilingual.
Mhm.
Um, I work with a lot. I love working with people from different cultures. It's
Mhm.
something I'm learning Spanish myself now. So I really
Mhm.
love it. And I think that that's an area I would like to get more involved in, working, hiring more agents from more realtors, whether they be experienced or not. Obviously, more experience, the better for me, but I
Mm.
prefer, I would love to really expand into more of an international set.
Right.
I think it would
Uh,
be interesting.
Yeah, I can't see that going wrong. I mean, you don't want to stretch yourself too thin, and as you said, I mean, with real estate, it's also comes with who you know, and if you've been in this market for so long, you probably have a lot of great relationships within those markets that allow you to be able to expand. Um, so that would be interesting. I look forward to seeing how that goes. But I guess on an advice side, I mean, you've seen and you've touched so many areas of real estate for somebody who's getting into brokerage right now or getting into buying or selling in today's market, what's sort of one piece of advice you would give them?
To a buyer or a seller,
Yeah.
I think one has even a new agent coming in. I think the biggest thing today is you have to have a lot of patience. You have to
Mhm.
be calm. You have to be really patient and understand the market. I mean, I really go over explaining the process with my clients because even
Mhm.
if I explain it once, it doesn't matter. I have to go
Mhm.
through it again. I think they also have to understand that they're buying a, or selling, a major asset. And they have to be willing to, go through any stress or any issues that could arise. And I think that's one of the biggest things, especially a buyer that's come out of a very low inventory market. I have clients who've been through multiple biddings and they have lost the bidding. So I think that going forward, they have to just, be resilient and can't get upset by it and kind of just say, okay, we'll move on to the next property. Um, I think that's one of the biggest concerns I have. The other, I always tell my clients when you're first starting, I always like them to have their finances in order.
Mm.
So they have to have either a mortgage broker or a banker, or if they're buying in cash, many of our clients are, they
Mm.
have to have all their cash in order, right?
Mm.
They have to have their brokerage accounts in order. They have to have their tax return. Everything related to their finances, they should have in order. And the other thing is that I like the team in place. So if I'm part of it, I want the financing in place, and I want the legal aspect in place. And that's when I first meet with the person. I ask them, do you have an attorney? And I only encourage a real estate attorney
Mm.
if they're dealing, if they're buying and selling property, as opposed to a trust and estate attorney, or unless they also do a lot of real estate. So
Right.
I think that it's important for the buyer out there. I tell them, make sure if you're going to start looking, make sure you have a strong pre-approval. Make sure that pre-approval is valid, is updated, is within 3 months old. And if not, I need an updated one, and make sure we have an attorney on board. And the other person I forgot is a home inspector. So
Mm.
it's very important that I give them a list of people. I never give one name. I give out several names in each category, and then it's up to them to choose.
Right.
So that's
Yeah,
probably
that's
what I tell people to do first.
That's great. Yeah, there's a long list of things to make the process a lot more seamless. And again, a lot of people wouldn't know that that's what it takes to kind of get the ball rolling sooner than later.
Right.
It's not just looking for a house and then all of a sudden you're able to move into it the next month. But
Uh,
um,
but I, but even when they find a house, I help them through everything, the process. So I'll refer moving companies. I refer, if we need to have some. I was working with a client recently who there was a concern about some structural issues. So even before they did inspections, we set up a meeting with a structural engineer to
mm,
try to. I do so much due diligence that I want to make sure they're protected on or on their purchase. I'm working with somebody who's buying a piece of land now. He's in contract, and he's not used to dealing in the U.S. market. So I had to make sure He understood the process, not only from me, but I put him on the phone with the building department. I wanted to make sure he had his questions answered
Mhm.
straight from them, not interpreted from me or by me.
Right.
So
Right. Well, I'm sure all the clients always appreciate getting in touch with you, Michelle. Clearly, you've touched so many different avenues of real estate, and I can see why you've had so much success over the years. I really appreciate you coming on. I know the listeners are going to enjoy this, all your
thank you
insights
for inviting.
and whatnot. So, um, I would like to invite everybody, if they're interested in getting involved with Silversons or hearing what Michelle has to say on any of her blogs, check out my description and the link below, and you'll have all the links to her socials. But Michelle, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Have a great day. Be well.
Appreciate it.
Bye bye.